name is Crady DeGolian. I am the director of the National Center for Interstate Compacts here at the Council of State Governments, and we are delighted that you have taken an hour or so to join us and talk about what is an emerging topic in the field of energy, transactive energy. The reality is our power system is changing. We are seeing increasing amounts of distributed resources. We are seeing greater reliability on renewable resources, and transactive energy systems provide a new avenue to bring those to market. They rely on a market-based approach to promote grid reliability that reflects the evolving role of customers as both generators and consumers, and perhaps just as importantly, permit customers to work together to shift generation load and demand. And so we are absolutely delighted to have everyone on the line today to talk about this topic. We are joined by Mark Knight, Representative Tom Sloan, and Dr. Ron Melton, and I will read each of their bios in just a second and then turn the floor over first to Mark. But did want to go over a couple housekeeping items before we go any further. First, this session is being recorded. All of the remarks from our three panelists will be uploaded onto CSG's Knowledge Center. That will probably take a couple days, but you will be able to review both the slides that our panelists use as well as hear the remarks via CSG's Knowledge Center here in a couple days, and I will get that web link to everyone at the close of the session. And also, I wanted to make one note about questions. If you have any questions, we certainly encourage you to submit those. That can be done using the question dialog box on your GoToWebinar screen. Those questions will come directly into our staff, and then I will read them to each of our respective panelists. Certainly, you can direct questions either to an individual panelist, or if you want them to be taken up as a whole by any one of the panelists, that's perfectly fine too. I certainly encourage you to submit those questions at any point, and we will take them up the last 10 or 15 minutes of the session during Q&A. With that, I want to take just a brief moment to not only thank our three panelists, but also introduce them publicly, and then, like I say, I will turn the floor over to Mark Knight. First is Mark Knight. Mark is an executive consultant within the Utility Solution Group at CGI and an experienced consultant with experience in utilities companies. His background includes distribution, transmission, metering, systems integration, deregulation, smart grid, interoperability, asset management, and risk management. Mr. Knight also serves as the chair of the GridWise Architecture Council, which is a working group formed by the U.S. Department of Energy and intended to promote and enable interoperability among many of the entities that interact with the nation's electric power system. Next will be Representative Tom Sloan. Representative Sloan has been a member of the Kansas House of Representatives since 1995. His activities as a state rep include serving as the chairman of the Vision 2020 Committee and is a member of the Energy and Utilities and Government Efficiency and Technologies Committee. His primary policy areas are renewable energy, electric transmission, water quantity and quality, and telemedicine. And Rep. Sloan will serve his 11th term in the Kansas State House. Holds a Ph.D. in political science, has taught at the university level, and organized 10 regional energy and telecommunications summits in Kansas. It should also be noted that Rep. Sloan has been a tremendous friend and advocate for the Council of State Governments, and in previous roles served as our past chair of the Energy and Environment Committee. So certainly we appreciate all Tom Sloan has done for us here at CSG. And then we'll wrap up with Dr. Ron Melton. Dr. Melton is the director of the Pacific Northwest Smart Grid Demonstration Project and serves as the administrator of the GridWise Architecture Council. He is a senior technical leader for smart grid research and development projects and has over 30 years of experience applying computer technology to a variety of engineering and scientific projects. In addition to smart grid-related projects, Dr. Melton has recent experience in research in engineering and cybersecurity, as well as process control system security. So with that, I'm going to once again thank the panelists, and I will turn the floor over to Mark.
Thanks, Grady. First of all, I want to welcome everybody to the webinar and just introduce the GridWise Architecture Council and say a few words about who we are and why we're all here today. Probably a bit misleading to say we're going to wrap up with Ron's presentation. I think Tom and I are just kind of the intro, and then basically the entire webinar is going to be Ron talking through some examples about transactive energy. But to start with, the GridWise Architecture Council was formed by the US Department of Energy in 2004, and as Grady said in his introduction, our role is to promote and enable interoperability among the many entities that interact with the electric power system. We are a balanced team of 13 industry representatives who propose principles for the development of interoperability concepts and standards. As to what we do, the Council provides guidance, tools, and publications related to smart grid. And in the spirit of advancing interoperability of an ecosystem of smart grid devices and systems, last year we created a Transactive Energy framework document to provide a context for identifying and discussing development and application of this technology. This year what we've been doing is working on discussing transactive energy with broader audiences to get more of an understanding of these concepts within the industry. And this webinar is an example of that type of work. And I'd like to thank Grady and the CSG for also extending the webinar invite to members of the IEEE Energy Policy Committee who are inviting to a meeting tomorrow in Washington, D.C. One of the things that the Council is planning on doing next year is developing a decision makers checklist for transactive energy. Now this checklist is planned to be a tool to help regulatory, utility, and service provider decision makers evaluate options such as capital asset investments or new information technology opportunities to determine whether they conform to the principles and attributes that encapsulate transactive energy. And following on from this webinar, we would be very much interested in input from yourselves during this work next year, or perhaps even doing another webinar at some point, when we've reached a good point in that work to get to discuss a draft document and look for feedback. So all of this transactive energy work started because of the changes happening in the industry, and Ron's going to cover some of those changes at the beginning of his presentation. Grady covered some of them in his introduction about the increasing penetration of distributed energy resources, bidirectional flow, and the ubiquitous presence of intelligence and communications everywhere around the system. So those are really key drivers for a lot of this. But before we get into Ron's presentation, I just wanted to hand over to another GWAC member, Tom Sloan, to say a few words about why transactive energy should be on your radar. Tom's been a GWAC member for, I think, 4 years, Tom, now, and has been a member of the Kansas House representative since 1995, so he knows what he's talking about. Tom?
Yeah, just don't ask my wife about that. Yeah, I too thank people for joining either during this webinar or who pick it up afterwards. And I've become interested in the movement or the potential movement of energy between customers as well as between customers and utilities, because historically utilities had a one-dimension, one-direction communication and energy delivery system. They produced it, they moved it, and they delivered it. Over the years, we've had usually larger companies, refineries, other heavy industry groups that could generate their own heat and power as a byproduct of their manufacturing, and they got special rates. Sometimes they would sell power to the utility, but usually they got a rate so that they wouldn't be self-generating much. We've had interruptible rates, again, where utilities during peak demand period could encourage some of their customers to self-generate, and in turn they got lower electric rates the whole year. With the rise of small wind, rooftop solar is becoming cost-effective, an increasing number of customers, including residential customers, have the capability to generate all or part of their electric needs. You combine that with presidential directives from 2 presidents and several congressional actions directing the military to conserve energy, go greener, and to generate their own energy when feasible. You have customers and boards of directors of companies like Walmart and the Kroger grocery store chain saying they want those stores or businesses to be greener. So they're looking at rooftop solar. Some of them, like Walmart, has actually invested in a wind farm. So you have a combination of public demand that businesses become self-generating or engage in distributive energy generation. You have technologies that increasingly permit customers of all types, residential through the large industrial and the military, to engage in this. And you combine that with the so-called smart grid and ultimately the smart appliances. So we have two-way communications between utilities and customers. The utilities are able to modify customer behavior. Customers are able to convey their willingness to engage in energy modifications in terms of their consumption. Transactive energy is an umbrella that talks about how these communications, how these relationships that are evolving over time can be handled in a pragmatic as well as a theoretical manner. The reason that I'm pleased that so many of you are going to be listening to this discussion is that the rules under which our public utility commissions or public service commissions operate vis-a-vis the utilities are going to have to change. You have a company like IKEA that has a corporate objective of being totally off the grid. You have other companies and individuals who want to have the grid provide backup power largely. And then you've got those who want to only enter into the marketplace during peak periods or during special circumstances. The regulatory rules are going to have to change. Some of that's going to be directed by legislators as we look at how technology, energy generation, customer expectations, smart applications on phones and other devices all come together. And so I would encourage you to ask questions as Ron Melton goes through his presentation. I would also commend to you that the November issue of Public Utility Fortnightly has an article on why policymakers should pay attention to transactive energy, and that might supplement what you're going to see and hear in today's presentation. With that, Dr. Melton.
So thank you very much, Tom. If we could go back just a moment to the title slide, perhaps. What I want to do this afternoon is cover 3 major areas here. First, as we've been hearing from Mark and Tom and Crady, some of the why. Why are we talking about this new approach of transactive elements in the grid? Then talk a little bit about what that is with some examples, simple examples to try to drive home the basic concepts. It may sound complicated when we say transactive energy or transactive grid. I'm hoping you'll see when we're done here that it's got some fairly simple concepts involved. And then give a little discussion of how this looks from the point of view of end users or consumers, distribution system operators, and transmission system operators. So that's my objective here in the next several slides. So we could go ahead to the next slide, please. So we heard from Tom a good overview of many of the different things that are happening. But I want to elaborate a little bit on some of what he was saying. The distributed energy resources, or DER as they're abbreviated here, are growing in the system, especially on the distribution side. Tom mentioned, for example, rooftop photovoltaics, small wind. There's also storage systems becoming more prevalent. Solar City, who many of you may have heard of, which sells or leases solar systems to residential customers, expects within the next 5 years, for example, to include a storage device with every one of their solar installs. This all leads to increased variability. So Tom mentioned a bunch of different historical rate structures. We've maybe heard of time of use rates or tiered rates or other rate structures that have been put in place by utilities historically to try to incentivize consumers to change their pattern of consumption of electricity. Unfortunately, although those rate structures may have been useful when they were first introduced, they're no longer as useful, and that's because of the increased variability in the system. We now need to have consumers adjust their behavior with fine time granularity. And for the most part, we tend to talk about things happening in 5-minute time intervals. But why is that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First, as wind picks up or drops off, that happens when it happens. And so we need to be able to help support the grid with responses of adding or dropping load to help support the wind variability. If you think about electric vehicle penetration and electrification of transportation, when you charge your car is going to be at many different points in time, and we need you to be able to adjust your car charging both to match the needs of the grid, but the grid also to match your needs as a consumer when you need to charge your car. And so this increased temporal variability is one of the things that's driving much of our concern here. Load growth in many parts of the country is low or declining now. In part, that's because of the penetration of rooftop photovoltaics in some parts of the country. But at the same time, with electrification of transportation, as an example, there's the potential for peak load growth. And so this gives us a real dilemma in terms of the efficiency of the system. We need a system that takes advantage of resources more effectively throughout the day and doesn't require us to build expensive generation resources just to meet peak load a very small number of hours of the year. And lastly, people, consumers, both residential and businesses, are buying an increasing number of intelligent devices. The loads on the network are becoming intelligent. The loads on the network will begin to make decisions about how they're going to consume electricity, and we need to take advantage of that and give them information that allows them to make those decisions in a way that's beneficial both for the owner of the device and the grid as well. Next slide, please. So with all of this happening in the system, there's a few trends that we see emerging here. One is a move from the power system of old, which was a central power station, a large coal plant, a nuclear plant, or perhaps a large gas turbine that would operate in a load-following manner, dispatched, as they say in the industry, every hour to adjust the output of that facility to match the expected load for the coming hour. And we are moving, in many cases, away from that model to a coordinated multi-resource. So we still will need central power stations, but we have many more moving parts than before, and they have to be coordinated. Operation that is supply following. So driven much more by the variability in the distributed energy resources throughout the system being an integrated component of operating the system. Secondly, in some parts of the country, we're seeing dramatic changes in load patterns. The California Independent System Operator, CAISO, for example, has recently published what's been being called the California duck curve. The duck curve shows a drop in net load, and in fact a positive net load in the middle of the day in many cases, especially when we look out to 2030 because of the penetration of rooftop photovoltaics. They get into, in the middle of the day on a bright sunny day, an overgeneration situation. This is a much different operational challenge than the system is typically faced, and is even starting to have conversations emerge about what to do with that excess power in the middle of the day. For example, possibly running desalination plants in the middle of the day that become more economically efficient with essentially free power to operate them. And last but not least, with all of these different moving parts, we need new techniques to effectively engage them to allow us to maintain reliability, even improve reliability, hopefully, and maintain the efficiency and economic effectiveness of the electric power system. So next slide, please. So one of the approaches for taking care of these problems is what we call transactive systems or transactive energy. This is an approach for engaging these diverse set of active parts. So what I want to do is go through some scenarios here for you that will help us see how this would work and what this would look like from the point of view of the regional system operator, sometimes called a transmission system operator or a independent system operator, from the point of view of the distribution system operator. This phrase distribution system operator is a somewhat new term. We've heard of distribution systems, we've heard of wires companies. Now the notion of a distribution system operator is that they now need to introduce some market constructs at the retail level. And so this term has been emerging to represent that new dimension to distribution systems. And finally, end users. How would this look from the point of view of an end user? So if we could go to the next slide. So our scenario that we're going to use is of course highly simplified, but should serve to get some of these ideas across. So we've got transactive energy or a transactive energy system deployed in a distribution system. We've got a regional transmission operator, an RTO, that has markets for energy and services. So they, for example, have day-ahead markets, hourly markets, and spot markets. Typically, they would operate that day-ahead market to plan the coming day on an hourly basis, or even finer granularity than that, possibly. Some of them now have five-minute planning. And then hourly, they revisit that and replan the coming hour, and then they have spot markets that they make up long or short positions relative to electricity as the day progresses. All of the parties involved in this example are going to be engaging in the planning of load activities, and we're going to be looking forward in time as we look at the day and move through the day, and planning of prices. And they're able to exchange this information with each other. And we're going to have a very simple network topology. So let's take a look at that topology on the next slide here. So let's just assume, for simplicity's sake, we have a wind resource on the bulk side, so large-scale wind. And when that wind is available, that costs, we're going to say, 5 cents a kilowatt hour. We have fossil plants in our system still. When those fossil plants are operating, they cost 20 cents a kilowatt hour. And we have a nuclear plant, and when it's operating, it operates at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. Now those are arbitrary costs, just to show some differentiation of cost between our three resources. We have a transmission system with a single node here for moving the power from the generation to the consumption points. And there are three distribution systems being served by this transmission system. Distribution System 1, or DS1, being a residential feeder, so residential customers. Distribution System 2, or DS2, similarly residential. And Distribution System 3, feeding commercial and industrial customers. So there are slightly different patterns of use between these different types of customers. So that's why we have 3 different representations here. So let's go ahead and start our day here. We're going to look at the day in the life of the Transactive grid, and our story begins at 6 p.m. in the evening, where we're planning the day ahead now, and we have a weather forecast. So that's an important part of estimating how loads are going to behave. And the weather forecast says we're going to have a moderate spring day tomorrow, not unusually warm. We're going to have a little bit of wind overnight. And our power forecast is that wind power is available with a low consumption expected and a low overnight electricity price for at least part of the night because of that, and no transmission or distribution constraints expected. So one of the things that can affect prices is if we have a pathway that can only hold so much power, then that can be a constrained pathway if we're trying to send more power down that path than possible, and can affect the prices as well. But we don't expect any of that. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the next slide. And we see on this slide the forecast of price and load, price on the top. We see here we're expecting the price to be the same everywhere, so we're just seeing the price plotted in orange representing the distribution system 3. But we see that price drops down to our 5 cents a kilowatt hour from about 10 p.m. to 3 a.m., representing that wind that we're going to have overnight. And the rest of the time we're using the nuclear power station as base load support at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And we see our loads not doing anything, expecting to do anything unusual. It's a moderate day, so we see the loads just having a diurnal pattern of variation here that we would expect to see as we go through the night and then into the day, with things warming up in the daytime. So this is where we start. Now let's move ahead in time. Next slide. At 8 p.m. we get a revised weather forecast. As I mentioned earlier, weather is a big driver here, and that revised weather forecast says, hey, we were wrong. It's going to be hotter than usual. It's going to be unusually warm. And as a result, we're going to see the loads respond to that, and then we'll see the prices respond to that. And this interaction that we'll see on the next slide between loads and prices is the example of the interaction taking place within a transactive energy system. So this is where we started before we got the new forecast. Now we get an updated forecast, and we see the loads shift, and you see we have higher loads later in the day around 5 p.m. In the transmission system, which is the aggregate of the loads coming in from the distribution systems. Now the price forecast will respond to that, and we see that in the afternoon, when the loads have increased, we need to bring in the coal plant. So the price goes up to 20 cents a kilowatt hour between 2 p.m. and 7 p.m. as we need more power than we can get from just the nuclear plant, and we don't have any particular wind power available then. And so then now the loads are going to respond to the price going up. And we see that the loads flatten out a little bit in the evening, but they don't go down enough that we're going to be able to drop that coal plant off. But this interaction between price and loads and price and loads is an example of the type of interaction we would expect to see in a transactive system, where there's a negotiation type process either through market activity with formal contracts or through other mechanisms that causes this variability to be taken into account. So let's keep going. Now we move to 11 p.m. and we get a new forecast. In fact, the winds are going to be much stronger than they had been forecast, and they're going to last longer. That'll cause the price to drop for an extended period of time overnight, the rest of the evening, and we'll see some adjustments based on that as people, for example, decide it's a good time to preheat their hot water or charge their electric vehicle. I say people, the automated energy management systems in their homes and businesses is really who would do this. Let's go ahead and see how that looks on the load and price forecast. So here's our updated or our information we had started with. So we see where we ended with the previous example. Now let's go ahead and move ahead. So now we have the price forecast with updated wind, and you see we've got that 5 cent kilowatt hour price extended out for an extended period of time. So let's see how the distribution feeders respond to that. And we see a bump in load at around 3, 4, 5 a.m. as a result of that. Now that's going to cause a local problem in the distribution system. Let's go ahead and look at that. So we see that because DS2 is now constrained, say there's a bunch of electric vehicles trying to charge, we have a local price adjustment on DS2 to handle that local problem. And so go ahead again. And we see that the loads on DS2 now have come back down to help manage that local problem. Now the important thing about this is that when we're talking about the costs or prices in a transactive system, they're not the same everywhere in the system. They'll be differentiated by the topology of the system and the local conditions and the different elements of the system as they spread out through the distribution feeders and transmission substations and so forth. So let's go on again. So now we're going to go later in the day. So we're at 2 p.m. now, and we're going to see, you know, things really have gotten hot. We had that updated weather forecast, and it's even hotter than we expected. And so that's going to cause a lot more air conditioning. That's going to cause a transmission system constraint in our ability to deliver power. And so let's see how that looks. So here we are, hot weather as expected. Let's go ahead. But because of that hot weather at 2 p.m., we've got an unexpected transmission system constraint, and that's driving the prices up even more to 50 cents a kilowatt hour, which is very high in our example. And so what we see here, if we go ahead, is that the loads respond to that. The loads now decrease and then pop back up once that constraint is ended and the prices drop back down. So go ahead again, which takes us through our set of examples. So what are some key points from all of this? First, the exchange of information that's taking place. This is putting the smart in smart grid, taking advantage of the information that becomes available to us through the different devices and systems. And using that information, we have price changes based on time, based on location, based on grid conditions, changing weather conditions, and so forth. It's important that these price changes be transparent, that everybody gets to see what's going on and they exchange this information. There are a lot of different economic complexities to this that I'm not going to go into, but just to mention them because there's much work to make sure these types of systems are fair, that they can't be gamed, that they can't be cheated, and so forth. There's various mechanisms we can use for implementing these systems. We haven't described the precise nature of the interactions, but that interaction, that negotiation, or that market clearing process that takes place that would cause the changes in price and consumption are key to the result. And lastly, it's important that we have both forecasts of price and forecasts of load. The loads need to see the forecasts of price to plan how to adjust their behavior, and the supply side needs to see the changes in load plans so that they can likewise change their plans and reflect that in prices. Price in this case is basically an incentive. We're incentivizing people to use less when electricity is expensive and to use more when electricity is cheap, and through that to try to balance and make the system economically effective and efficient. Continuing on, from an end user point of view, the response is useful if we have actionable information, and that actionable information is the price forecast. And we need to see some proportionality between magnitude of price change and magnitude of response by the end user. End users right now don't provide any of this type of information into the system. There's a need for the automation and other technology to enable them to do so, and to enable them to then take advantage of the information about price to manage their consumption and hopefully reduce their costs as an end user. How this will look across different end user categories will vary. It'll vary based on industrial versus commercial versus residential, and even with different types of houses and different types of consumptions and residential settings. It will vary. Continuing on. Distribution point of view. Well, the distribution system becomes a coordinator in this. They become the mediator between the transmission system and the users. It needs to know the responses of the end user. It needs to know what is needed by the bulk power system as represented by the costs, and it brings those two together. Reliability becomes extremely important still, and so the distribution system has to be in this intermediate role so that it can also take advantage of these techniques to maintain system reliability. As compared to transmission system, the distribution system we're going to see is much more dynamic and diverse, and because of that, these flexible type approaches are needed. Moving on. This provides some new opportunities to the transmission system, to the regional operator point of view. Regional operators are in many ways risk managers. They manage both financial risk of the cost of availability of electric power and reliability risk of the ability to deliver that power. With better information about the current and future load behavior and the ability to help moderate that behavior through pricing information, the risk of financial risk and the reliability risk is potentially reduced for the regional operator. And we could be talking about hundreds of millions of dollars here potentially. And that is a cost that then is able to be reduced for all stakeholders. And so as we figure these things out, as we see these type of benefits accrue, it should be good for everybody. So I think, let's see, moving on, we've got, I think, one more slide here. Yep. So this is hopefully helps you understand what we're talking about. If you hear the term Transactive Energy or Transactive Systems, you can certainly contact me if you're interested in more information about the Architecture Council. We urge you to look at the Architecture Council website where the Transactive Energy framework that Mark Knight mentioned is posted, and where other information about this topic is posted. You can certainly contact me directly, and I think Mark and Tom also, but I'll leave it up to them to say that. So thanks for your attention. I think we're moving into the question-answer period now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Melton. This is Crady again. Let me, first of all, thank each of our panelists. I've got about 20 till 3 Eastern Time by my clock. That leaves us about 20 minutes for questions and answers. We've already had 3 or 4 come in, but certainly encourage you all, as you have been doing already, to submit those via the dialogue box. They'll come directly into our staff. And with that, the first question, and I suspect this is for any of you all, but perhaps for Dr. Melton, how much oversight would a PUC have in your example to make sure that residential customers are not at the mercy of individual customers and the utility who have full-time staff to manage their load based on the price and consumption flexibility?
I'll certainly take an initial stab at that, and Tom and Mark can jump in as they wish. There is definitely a need for oversight roles in these type of systems. First of all, there's a need for, in the design of such systems, that they be auditable, that one can in fact observe the activities, the transactions, if you will. But there's also a requirement, as one looks at these in the context of things like retail rate design for real-time rates. One does have to take into account in those rate designs factors such as avoiding windfall profits and what to do in situations where it is possible for that to happen in these types of systems, and what to do when that happens in terms of redistributing the windfall back to the participants in the system. Here at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, we worked with AEP in Ohio on their GridSmart, regional smart grid demonstration, where they demonstrated a variation on this technology with a 5-minute real-time price driven by a double auction market. And in designing that rate, which was approved by the Ohio PUC, one of the things we had to do was build in a mechanism for keeping customers whole, and that ended up looking in many ways like a peak time rebate relative to the way the industry's operated in the past. So, be glad to elaborate on that further if I didn't fully answer the question, but the need for oversight is definitely a part of these systems. Tom or Mark, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm sorry, I was making some notes. Go ahead, Mark.
No, I was just going to say I wasn't going to, but I mean, it seems like it probably fits into the kind of your area of background and expertise, Tom.
Well, I think that that's one of the reasons that I encouraged CSG and CRADI to hold this webinar, because the discussion is going to have to be over what new rules public utility commissions and commissioners will have to make sure that there is this transparency of prices, that the residential customer who has a wind generator or a solar panel or ground source heat pump or wants to discharge their electric vehicle battery to enter the market are able to do so at reasonable prices with reasonable safeguards, that they're not going to be, I'll say, Enron, if that's a word, where the market is manipulated by the larger players or by the utilities. So I think that's part of the key set of questions that legislators are going to have to look at.
Perhaps as a follow-up, and I'll take these slightly out of order to the way they have come into us, but I think this question is perhaps appropriate, sort of given the responses we got there from Representative Sloan and Dr. Melton. You all talked, especially toward the end of the slides, about some of the potential benefits that this type of approach presents to states, to policymakers, to consumers especially. The question, though, to you all would be, what are some of the challenges that are ultimately going to be presented, both to states, to Representative Sloan's colleagues, as well as individual consumers and those sorts of things?
So I'll jump in, and Tom, and then you can jump on after me, I guess. So there are definitely some challenges here. There's a need in the design of these systems to address the concern we were just talking, for example, to have techniques that assure incentive compatibility, which is the economics term for not being able to game the system. There's also the need for theoretical research still to assure that these systems would be stable. As you can imagine, in this price negotiation I was alluding to, one could potentially set up oscillations where I say, well, the price is going to be high, and you say, I'm not going to use as much, and I say, well, then the price is going to be low, and you say, I'll use more, and I say, then the price is going to be high, and we don't ever converge. So there have to be the technology and understanding to assure that these techniques can converge and be reliable and not disrupt the system. There's a heavy need for automation in terms of homes and businesses, building energy management systems. For example, only the very largest buildings in the country have building energy management systems, and even those that do, they're not necessarily operated with the highest level of efficiency. That type of technology and automation needs to be applied more ubiquitously to take advantage of these technologies. The good news is things like Nest thermostats that are becoming more popular give us some of the pieces we need to do that. There's a challenge to overcome a natural reluctance to real-time prices. There's a perception that's persisted for a long time that real-time prices put consumers at risk when there are constraints in the system that can drive up prices, and that needs to be addressed both in terms of demonstrating through simulation modeling and field projects why that's not the case, or through building into the economic mechanisms ways to keep customers whole in the face of things like that happening and avoid them taking on undue risk. So those are some of the factors off the top of my head that I can think of. Don?
And Ron approached it from engineering perspective, and I'll approach it more from a public policy and a public activity perspective. You know, we have most Americans carrying around smart devices, whether it's an iPhone or an Android or something else, but they're able to interact. And we have the technology today that you can modify your home thermostat, you know, using your phone from your office or on a farm tractor or something else. We also have an increasing number of companies that want to help you as a customer manage your energy use. I mean, that's everybody from Google to the local security firm. The challenge from my perspective is that the utilities run the real probability they could lose load as customers are able to increasingly manage their energy use, take advantage of entering a marketplace where they could buy or sell power based on price and their needs. So someone with a rooftop solar array would be able to sell in or buy power, just as utilities do today, depending on the price of their generation versus the price on the open market. So again, for legislators, for regulators, the issue is going to be, how does this new market capability that's driven by technology on roofs or in basements or wherever, in their cars, on their phones, and how do you integrate that customer-driven behavior option with the need to make sure that that 90-year-old widow who's not technologically savvy isn't being punished because she can't participate in the marketplace? And secondly, how do you ensure that the utilities, who ultimately are going to be the backstop generators, to make sure that if the sun doesn't shine or a cloud goes over during the heat of the day, you know, that the power stays on for all those customers? How do you make sure that the system works fairly for all the potential players?
Interesting answers. Thank you both. Another question that's come in. If customers are able to see prices and take action, will the PUC staff be able to also follow the price in generation shifts? And assuming that they would that perhaps allow for gaming of the system, or perhaps a different way to ask it, what do we need to do to ensure that gaming doesn't occur?
Well, I think this is one of the places where one can take advantage of automation to help have a system that in some ways requires that automation and that can help reduce the potential for gaming. But the other part of it is the algorithms, the mathematics behind the ways that the prices are adjusted and consumption is adjusted would have to be designed with a set of market rules that are, as I mentioned earlier, incentive compatible, meaning there's no advantage to trying to game the system. That playing the game straight is the most advantageous position for a participant. That's not necessarily easy to do, but that is one of the important things. The other thing to keep in mind, one of the points I was trying to get across in the examples, this is not a ubiquitous price, so it's not that the California Independent System Operator, for example, or PJM, is broadcasting one price to everybody, and everybody is responding to that price and somehow manipulating a big market. The prices are differentiated geographically, and so yes, the PUC and others with oversight responsibilities will need to be able to observe those prices, but there will be many different prices. I think that also potentially makes it more difficult to game the system. Tom or Mark, do you guys have anything to add there?
I was just going to say about gaming. I mean, looking on gaming obviously as a negative thing. So broadening that, certainly my response in terms of things we want to avoid. I mean, the other is, yeah, we want to make sure that all of these operations, transactions don't have any kind of negative impact on reliability. And in fact, one of the drivers for actually looking at this stuff is to find ways to actually make use of all of this technology and new devices and their ability to respond intelligently to actually have a positive impact on reliability. So we're talking about the impact on customers and the pricing side of things, but the other thing just to bear in the back of your minds while you're thinking about this is a potentially tremendous opportunity as we see more and more of these diverse resources to actually improve the reliability of the system and to respond to changing load conditions.
And I would follow up by saying I expect that the regional transmission operators and the multiple states public utility commissions will be monitoring closely to make sure that customers are treated fairly and that the system reliability remains intact.
Okay, thank you all. A couple questions before we wrap up. One, just a general housekeeping question for Representative Sloan. I believe in your introductory remarks you mentioned a recent article that was published on this topic. Would you be willing to share the article or perhaps the name of the publication with those on the line?
Sure. It's the November issue of Public Utilities Fortnightly. And I can send you a link, Grady.
About a week ago?
Yes.
With your permission, I would be happy to distribute that to those on the line if they're interested.
That's fine, or put a link to it from what you're going to upload.
Yes, exactly. Perfect. That's a good plan. Thank you. And then perhaps one last question. It may be a good question to wrap up on. You sort of talked broadly as a panel about where we are. I think the question that's come in from the audience is, where do we go from here? What is the timeline? What is the feasibility of this becoming a sort of common occurrence in those sorts of things? So I'll open it up to each of you all a couple minutes in where you think we're headed from here with respect to transactive energy.
Well, I think we feel it's not so much a case of if, but when. The pilots that Ron described are significant scale projects that are already underway. There are similar concepts and technologies in the EU that are being piloted now, and we actually have a Transactive Energy conference next week in Portland with panelists coming from around the world to talk on this issue. So the thing is, we've never seen, I think, such rapid technology evolution and penetration into our lives, and people are looking for ways to make use of that. So what we're trying to do is establish some kind of general context so that people can actually talk on a level playing field with the same terminology, such that when these ideas and market requirements crop up, that there is a basis for people taking a similar approach, and that's really what we're trying to do: educate people and have people all working, from the same perspective. And as well as the article that Tom mentioned for Public Utilities Fortnightly, the council also had an article in the October version of Energy Biz, and that was driven by a goal we set ourselves of trying to describe this in 1,000 words or less. And then after we published our framework, people were saying it would be good if I had a way of visually understanding what you're trying to talk about. And so one of the things we did the first half of this year was put together a one-page infographic on transactive energy, which we'd be happy to send you as well in case that helps understand what we're trying to talk about here.
I think that providing the link to the Energy Biz article would be a good idea. I kick myself for not remembering to mention that.
So, Grady, in answer to your question, I think we'll see a significant deployment of this technology over the next 10 years. We are beginning to see vendors say they are planning to include the support for this technology in their new products. We see utilities that are trying to engage in implementations for operational use, going beyond the pilot and demonstration type projects. There's still a lot of work to be done. The DOE is formulating a new program around this area, the U.S. Department of Energy, which will help support the development of this technology, assuming that it's funded. And so I think over the next 10 years, as Mark mentioned, we're going to see rapid progress in this industry, which is typically a very slow industry with only modest step changes. I think we'll see some fairly large step changes, and 10 years is a very rapid adoption time frame for this industry.
And I'll close with a couple of quick examples of how this can happen in the much nearer time frame, within a year. You have two businesses located in the same structure, same building, and the utility sends word down that there's going to have to be either rolling brownouts or blackouts unless people conserve. One business maybe runs a lot of high-speed computers. They can't afford to shut down. The other business may be able to self-generate using solar panels or storage batteries or all of their plug-in electric car batteries. You could have side business transactions where that second business will increase its generation to cover the failure of that first business to reduce its load. The second example I'll give is the governor of Kansas has installed solar panels on his private home, on his private residence, and is looking for ways where he can monetize those the potential, not just to reduce his electric bill, but also to, in effect, monetize and earn on that investment. Now, that possibility doesn't exist yet in Kansas, but you have individual homeowners that are looking for those opportunities, and that will come because those third-party vendors, those innovators in terms of apps, will help drive the technology and therefore put pressure on utilities.
All righty. Well, gentlemen, let me, on behalf of our staff and our membership, extend a very sincere thanks to each of you all for taking the time to join us and to present on what was a very, very interesting topic, and I suspect what will prove to be a very interesting topic moving forward in the years to come, not only from a consumer standpoint, but especially from a public policy standpoint. I have gone right at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. We have done well in terms of timing and schedule. As I said, the webinar will be posted on CSG's Knowledge Center. That's www.csg.org/Knowledge Center. Usually takes about 48 hours or so to post. So it may be the end of this week or perhaps as late as early next week. But that will post. You will get an email notification that it is live on the web, and at that point, we will also make sure you receive a web link to the article that Representative Sloan referenced a couple different times during our remarks. I want to extend those of you who joined us a very sincere thanks. Your questions were excellent, and it helped really to facilitate a really lively and robust discussion. With that, again, I extend a very sincere thanks to our three panelists, and we are adjourned for the day.